Unacademy. Let's crack it.
Hello everyone, this is me Dhairya Gangwani and welcome back to yet another career related video on this channel. Now, how many of you have thought of making something of your own, using the audio platform because it's booming so much? And I know by now you already know what I'm referring to. Have you ever got this thought that you want to start a podcast of your own, but you've been stuck because you just don't understand where to start from? Who should your target audience be? Which platforms to use? How will you gain listeners? Or how will you be probably able to monetize on your podcast? I'm sure all of these questions would be coming to your mind. अब अगर आपने कभी भी ये सोचा है कि मुझे अपने थॉट्स लोगों के सामने रखने हैं एंड आई वांट टू स्टार्ट समथिंग ऑन द ऑडियो प्लेटफॉर्म व्हिच इज ऑब्वियसली मेजरली थ्रू पॉडकास्ट, इफ यू आर एन एस्पायरिंग पब्लिक स्पीकर और अ पॉडकास्टर और समवन हु वांट्स टू हैव देयर ओन टॉक शो इन द फ्यूचर, डू चेक आउट दिस वीडियो. थैंक यू सो मच. Now, in this 5-step journey of getting started with your own podcast, the first step that I would like to really lay emphasis on is to actually understand that why do you want to start your own podcast? And it may seem like a very dumb question or a silly question, but it is very important. Because trust me, whenever you start something of your own, you have to treat it like your own baby. And your own podcast, your own talk show, your own side hustle, your own venture. These are all things which are not something that you start today and you get away from it a day or a two later or a week later or even a year later. These are things that you have to get into when you think of it from a long-term perspective. And same is the case with podcasting. If you want to be able to create a sustainable podcast with good number of consistent listeners and you actually want to probably even in the future build a career out of it, or even if you're doing it on the side as a passion and a hobby but you want to keep yourself driven, for the numbers to come in, first your intent of starting the podcast has to be very clear. आप podcast क्यों create करना चाहते हो? What is your aim behind creating a podcast? Do you want to educate people? क्या आपको लोगों को बताना है कि आपकी thought process क्या है, या क्या आपको बस अच्छा लगता है when you went out your random thoughts जो आपके दिमाग में आते हैं? Or is it that you like collaborating with people, inviting guests, and you like having audio conversations where you're just able to hear them? आप सिर्फ उनको सुन सकते हो, देख नहीं सकते हो. आपका रीजन कुछ भी हो सकता है, but your intention has to be very clear, क्योंकि ये intention ही आपको in the long run help करेगा to stay consistent and to stay true to why you started the podcast. Because trust me, कभी ना कभी तो demotivation आती ही है, and that time when you feel like quitting, your reason of starting the podcast will keep you going, and that's why it's very important. And that is step number 1. Step number 2 in your journey of starting your own podcast is to actually understand that which domain, किस area में आपको podcast बनाना है, right? That is the step that you have to get into for sure. And सबके पास इसका clear idea नहीं होगा when you'll get started with creating your own podcast, and that's completely okay. You may be confused, शायद आपको पता नहीं होगा क्या मैं सिर्फ मार्केटिंग के बारे में बात करूंगा इस पॉडकास्ट में, या सिर्फ मैं कंसल्टिंग के बारे में बात करूंगा, या it's only going to be a humorous podcast where I'm going to call people, we'll crack jokes around normal situations जो हमारी जिंदगी में घर पे होते हैं. It could be anything. Yeah, will it only be an interviewee format where I'll be calling people, मैं उनको interview लूंगा, उनसे question answers पूछूंगा, and that would be it. So the point is that your podcast could be around any topic, could be around any niche, and you may not necessarily know which niche you want to build a podcast in the beginning. But what will happen is that you will have to retrospect, sit down and understand that what are some fields that you're genuinely passionate about and you would like to talk about, or you would like to interact with people about it, right, in your podcast. And that's how you will have at least 2 or 3 fields, and then you can make a decision of which one you're more inclined to. Maybe do some test runs, do some trials, कुछ sample podcast episodes you can just record and see where do you have more fun researching, curating, and talking about things, right? Let's say you do one episode of 2 minutes on marketing, one around consulting, and you do one around, let's say for example, sales. And you feel like when you're talking about sales, or when you'll make a podcast around sales, and you may have all of these 3 skills, you are more excited about the entire process, research karna, editing it, putting it up, and all of that, right? So then you would understand that maybe I should have a podcast which should be in the niche of sales. So deciding your niche will come with exploration and experimentation, and then you will know that this is going to be the niche or the topics around which I'm going to be talking about in my podcast. So that is going to be your step number 2 in starting your journey of building your own podcast or starting your own podcast. Now, when we talk about step number 3, it's very important to understand that whenever you are creating something of your own, right, even if it's on the audio platforms or audio plus visual platforms or only visual platforms, you will have people viewing your content or listening or tuning into it. Now, because podcasts are only audio only channels of interacting with your audience, you also have to understand that the kind of audience you will be actually tapping into is going to be a little more sophisticated, because they cannot necessarily see any visuals, any editing, any graphics or anything. They are just going to tune in or subscribe to your podcast because of the matter and the content you're putting out there, and just because of the sole ability of how you sound and if you make sense. Podcasts are very tricky that way. So analyzing your target audience before starting your own podcast is very important. Who are the people who are going to be consuming my content? Who could be the people who would be interested in these topics? For example, if you start a podcast around astrophysics, which is a very, very niche domain, right? It's a niche of a niche, right? It's a micro niche. Very few people have the kind of, I would not even say intellect, have the kind of interest to be able to consume content around a field like astrophysics and to be able to go ahead and listen to long episodes around them. So this is a micro niche field, and only people who are genuinely interested in it will tune into your podcast and listen to it. So you need to understand that, are you building a podcast for very, very specific micro niche people, or is your podcast going to cater to the masses? It's going to be generic, where anybody of any age group can tune in and just gain some information or get entertained and go back. And that is why identifying your target audience is important. Maybe conduct some surveys, talk to your friends, do a real-time analysis of sending your one sample recorded podcast to people in the age group of, let's say, 40 plus. Send it to some of your friends who are in your age group, some people younger to you, and try to analyze that how well are all the different age groups receiving your kind of content. And then you will also be able to understand who is actually going to be my target audience. And that brings me to step number 4. So far we have actually talked about how you need to first understand that what is going to be the reason for you starting your podcast. That is step number 1. Step number 2 is to analyze what is the topic on which you're going to be starting your podcast. What domain would it be around? Identifying your niche. Step number 3 was to actually understand who is going to be your target audience, right? Who are the people who are going to view your listen or tune into your podcast. And step number 4 in the journey is to actually understand what kind of equipment will you need to be able to record, edit and distribute your podcast. This is a very important step. As a podcaster, you need to understand that it is not you as a person who they look at, right? Even if you have someone who's called on your guest show and you interview them, it's going to be your audio quality which is going to determine how long do the tuners stay tuned to your episode and listen and play on to it till the end. And it's very important that you invest some money in good equipment, especially your audio equipment, which includes a good mic. You might not want to do it right at the beginning of your journey, but somewhere down the line, if you want to consistently do it and you're very passionate about it, you will have to make an investment of, at least buying a good mic so that you sound good, right? Other than that, I think you can record just from your smartphones, whether it's, an iOS or an Android today. You don't really have to go and buy very expensive or fancy gadgets. That's really not needed when you want to start your own podcast. Yes, a good pair of earphones or headphones could really help during the recording so that there's not a lot of friction and not a lot of background noise. And that's it. That should be it to at least get started, right? You don't have to make huge investments to start your own podcast. That's a myth, and don't fall for it, right? Just get started. Don't think about when I'll have, let's say, a 12,000 rupees Yeti or a Rode mic is when I'll get started with my podcasting journey. If Ranveer Alabadia had waited for that, he would never be where he is, right? So I hope you get the point. That is step number 4. Last step to starting your own podcast is to actually choose the right distribution channels to actually spread your podcast and market it, right? So your podcast has to reach its target audience, and that's only possible when you market it and you help it reach the right kind of people. Now today I've got various podcast publishing platforms like Spotify, Google Podcasts, you have also got Anchor, and you've got Apple Podcasts and so many other platforms. However, it's very important to understand that depending on the kind of user base and which country's audience is more active on a particular audio platform where you can publish your podcast, that you choose which platform do I want to publish it on. Generally, I think Anchor is a very safe choice to go with, because nor does it just give you a platform to distribute your podcast on all the other platforms that I named, like Spotify and like Google Podcasts and Apple Podcasts and other platforms, but it also gives you an option to record your podcast within the app itself. So within the application, once you download Anchor, you can actually start recording your podcast there. You can kind of do the basic editing there also and publish it there. And that's the only platform which allows you to publish it on other platforms by default. If you start your platform on Spotify, you cannot get a guarantee that you will be able to distribute it to other platforms. So what I'm trying to tell you is, once you publish your podcast on Spotify, it's just on Spotify, but once you publish it on Anchor, it's on all the platforms. So I think it's very important to understand that, do you want to again stick to one particular distributing platform and catch hold of that target audience, or do you want it to get a good viewership and listenership and gain the right kind of subscribers early on, so that you build a good community of listeners, and then you can probably niche it down or make it exclusive to one platform. So it's very important to understand which distributing channel you will follow, and also what marketing strategies will you use to kind of spread the word about the podcast. Which social media platforms are you going to utilize to kind of get people driven to go and subscribe to your podcast, right? Are you going to market it on your Instagram, on your YouTube, or on your LinkedIn, or all of it? And how are you going to make more and more people in your community know that you've started your own podcast? And I think that's it. After that, it's all about consistency and creating good content. So I hope that these 5 steps help you launch your own podcast in a very smooth way, and you're encouraged to be starting either your own talk shows or podcasts, because trust me, this is a field which is very, very beneficial and it is booming. People are tuning into a lot of audio nowadays, and if you're able to enter it in the right field and at the right time, there are going to be a lot of people who would want to view your content. So I hope this video helps. I'll see you in the next video. Thank you so much.